Imagine a man who once carried his squad through hell, now shoved out of a diner like yesterday's trash. On a rainy night in small-town America, a veteran's quiet plea for shelter was met with scorn, until 6 Navy SEALs stepped out of the shadows, their silence louder than any shout. This is the story of how one forgotten hero was lifted from the curb to a legend, and it'll remind you why honor still matters. Stick around because you won't believe what happens next. If this story moves you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment about a hero in your life who deserves respect. Subscribe for more true stories that prove courage never fades, no matter how the world tries to bury it. The rain fell in sheets over the neon-lit streets of Franklin, Tennessee, a small town where pickup trucks lined the roads and Friday night high school football was religion. At the corner of Main and 5th, the glow of Millie's Diner spilled onto the wet pavement, its red and white checkered sign promising home cooking since '62. Inside, the air smelled of fried chicken, coffee, and nostalgia, with waitresses in starched aprons weaving between booths packed with locals, families, retirees, and a few off-duty cops. The jukebox played Patsy Cline, and laughter bounced off the chrome-edged counters. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name unless you didn't belong. At 8:17 p.m., the bell above the door jingled, and a man stepped inside, his silhouette framed against the storm. He was in his late 60s, thin as a fence post, with a face carved by time and trouble. His army surplus jacket was soaked through, the green fabric clinging to his bony shoulders. In his left hand, he clutched a faded green beret, its special forces patch barely legible. His right hand gripped a cheap wooden cane, steadying his uneven steps. Water pooled at his feet as he stood there, eyes scanning the room for an empty seat. The diner went quiet for a split second. Then the chatter resumed, louder, as if to drown him out. "Sir, you can't come in here like that," said a young waiter, barely out of his teens, his name tag reading Cody. His voice was sharp, carrying over the clatter of plates. "You're dripping all over the floor. This ain't a flophouse." Cody's smirk was subtle, but it landed like a jab. A few patrons chuckled, nudging each other. An older woman in a corner booth whispered, "Probably just another drifter," to her husband, who nodded without looking up from his meatloaf. The man's shoulders sagged, but he didn't back away. "I just need a coffee," he said, his voice low, gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in hours. "I got money." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill, his fingers trembling from the cold. The beret in his other hand shook slightly, the patch catching the light, a faint reminder of a life no one in the diner seemed to care about. Cody crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Look, pal, we got standards. You're scaring the customers. Take it somewhere else, or I'm calling the sheriff." The word pal dripped with condescension, and the chuckles grew louder. A teenage girl at the counter, her phone already out, started filming, whispering to her friend, "This is going viral. Homeless guy getting owned." The diner's warmth felt colder now, its home cooking promise a lie for anyone who didn't fit the mold. The man's eyes dropped to the floor, where his cane rested in a puddle. "I served," he said, almost to himself, his voice barely audible over the jukebox. "Vietnam. Special Forces. I ain't here to cause trouble." But Cody wasn't listening. He stepped closer, pointing to the door. "Out, now. Don't make me say it again." No one stood up. No one spoke for him. The cops at the bar kept eating their pie. The families kept chatting. The girl kept filming. The man turned slowly, his cane tapping the linoleum, and shuffled toward the door. The bell jingled again as he stepped back into the rain, the neon light fading behind him. He was nobody to them, just a wet coat, a nuisance, a shadow to be swept away. But across the street, parked under a flickering street lamp, a black Ford F-150 idled quietly. Its windows were tinted, its engine a low hum beneath the storm. Inside, a man watched, his hands tight on the steering wheel. His name was Ethan Caldwell, a retired Navy SEAL, 42 years old, with a shaved head and a trident tattoo on his forearm. His gray eyes narrowed as the diner's door closed, the old man disappearing into the night. Ethan's jaw clenched, not with anger, but with something deeper, a memory of jungles, gunfire, and a debt he'd never repaid. 10 years ago, in a classified op in Kandahar, Ethan's team had been pinned down, ambushed, bleeding out in a dusty ravine. A Special Forces advisor, long retired but called back for one last mission, had dragged Ethan to safety, his own leg shredded by shrapnel. That advisor's name was Sam Wheeler, and Ethan had never forgotten the green beret Sam wore, or the way he'd said, "You're going home, kid," before collapsing. Sam survived, but Ethan never saw him again, until tonight, when that same beret, faded but unmistakable, walked into Millie's diner. Ethan reached for his phone, his movements deliberate. "It's Caldwell," he said when the call connected. "I found him. Millie's diner, Franklin. Get the team. Now." He hung up, his eyes still on the spot where Sam had vanished. The rain pounded harder, but Ethan's mind was clear. He wasn't just a bystander tonight. He was a brother in arms, and no one pushed a hero like Sam Wheeler onto the street. Not while Ethan was breathing. In the diner, Cody returned to wiping the counter, smug as ever. The girl posted her video to TikTok, captioned "Epic Fail at Millie's." The jukebox switched to Johnny Cash. Life went on, oblivious to the storm gathering outside. But across town, 3 more trucks were already rolling, their headlights cutting through the rain. 6 SEALs, men who'd faced death and never blinked, were coming. And when they arrived, Franklin, Tennessee would never be the same. Sam Wheeler limped along Main Street, his cane slipping on the wet sidewalk. The rain soaked his jacket, his beret now stuffed in his pocket to keep it dry. He didn't look back at the diner. He'd faced worse than Cody's sneers. Monsoon-soaked jungles, sniper fire, the screams of men he couldn't save. But tonight, the rejection stung deeper, not because of the words, but because of the silence. No one had cared enough to ask his name. No one had seen the soldier beneath the soaked coat. He stopped under a bus stop shelter, its plastic roof leaking in the corner. His hands shook as he pulled out the beret, tracing the Special Forces patch with a calloused thumb. It was all he had left of the man he'd been. Captain Samuel Wheeler, Green Beret, 2 tours in Vietnam, a silver star he never wore, a life that ended when the war did. Back then, he'd come home to protests, not parades. Baby Killer, they'd called him at the airport. He'd buried his medals, his pride, and eventually himself, drifting from job to job, city to city, until Franklin became his last stop. A shelter on the edge of town was home now, its cots and thin blankets a far cry from the jungles he'd mastered. Sam didn't complain. He never had. But as he stood there, the weight of 68 years pressed down, years of service, loss, and invisibility. He thought of his old team, the ones who didn't make it back. "You're still here, Sam," he muttered, his breath fogging in the cold. "Keep moving." He adjusted his cane and stepped back into the rain, unaware that half a mile away, Ethan Caldwell's truck was turning onto Main, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Inside the F-150, Ethan's radio crackled. "ETA 5 minutes, a voice said. It was Marcus Reed, another SEAL, his tone clipped and professional. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His team, 6 men, brothers forged in fire, knew what was at stake. They weren't coming for a fight. They were coming for honor, for a man who'd given everything and asked for nothing. And when they stepped into Millie's diner, the laughter would stop, the phones would drop, and a hero would rise from the shadows. The rain hammered Franklin's Main Street, turning gutters into rivers and blurring the neon signs into smears of red and blue. Sam Wheeler limped past shuttered storefronts, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the slick pavement. The cold seeped through his soaked army jacket, chilling his bones, but he kept moving. He always did. At 68, Sam had learned to carry pain like an old friend. Vietnam's jungles, a shrapnel-scarred leg, and a lifetime of being invisible had taught him that. But tonight, the sting of Millie's diner lingered, not in Cody's words, but in the laughter, the turned heads, The girl's phone pointed like a rifle. He'd faced enemy fire, but this was a different kind of ambush. Sam paused under the awning of a closed barbershop, its striped pole dark and still. He pulled the green beret from his pocket, the Special Forces patch frayed but proud. His thumb traced the stitched dagger, a habit from nights when memories came too close. Vietnam, 1969. He'd been 22, leading a 5-man team through the Central Highlands, dodging Viet Cong traps and monsoon mud. He'd carried his radio man, bleeding and half dead, 6 miles to an evac point. That earned him a Silver Star, but the medal sat in a pawnshop somewhere in Memphis. The beret was all he kept, a tether to the man who'd once believed in duty. Now it felt like a relic of someone else. He tucked it back in his pocket and glanced down the street. The shelter was a mile away, past the Dollar General and the Baptist church. He could make it even in this storm. Sam didn't pray much anymore, but he muttered, "Just one more step, Lord," and pushed forward, his cane slipping slightly. The rain hit his face, which was just as well. No one needed to see the weariness in his eyes, the kind that came from being forgotten by a country he'd bled for. Half a mile away, Ethan Caldwell's Ford F-150 rolled to a stop at a red light, wipers slapping against the windshield. The cab smelled of coffee and gun oil, a holdover from his days in the teams. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, not from the cold but from the fire in his chest. Seeing Sam Wheeler pushed out of Millie's had ripped open a decade-old wound. Kandahar, 2013. Ethan's SEAL team, ambushed in a ravine, was down to their last mags. Sam, then in his 50s and called back as a contractor, had charged through a hail of AK fire to pull Ethan from a burning Humvee. Sam's leg took shrapnel, but he didn't stop until Ethan was safe. "You're going home, kid," Sam had said. His voice steady even as blood soaked his fatigues. Ethan owed him his life, and tonight he'd start paying that debt. The radio crackled again. 2 minutes out," said Marcus Reed, the team's breacher, his voice calm but edged. Marcus was 6'4", built like a linebacker, with a scar across his cheek from a Taliban knife. He'd been with Ethan in Kandahar, seen Sam's run through the kill zone. The other 4, Javier Torres, Luke Hayes, Nate Collins, and Ryan Decker, were younger but no less loyal. They'd heard Ethan's stories about the Green Beret who didn't quit. When Ethan called, they didn't ask why. They just moved. Ethan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where headlights pierced the rain. 3 black trucks, 2 Rams, 1 Chevy, fell in behind him, their formation tight, like a patrol rolling into hostile territory. These men weren't active duty anymore, but they carried the SEAL ethos in their bones. Loyalty, precision, honor. They didn't need uniforms or orders to know what was right. Sam Wheeler was one of them, even if he didn't know it yet. Inside Millie's diner, the mood had shifted back to normal, or so it seemed. Cody, the waiter, slung plates of biscuits and gravy, his smirk still intact. The teenage girl, Kaylee, refreshed her TikTok, grinning as likes rolled in for her video. 70 views already, she whispered to her friend, Mia, who giggled over a milkshake. The cops at the bar finished their coffee, debating the Titans' playoff chances. The older woman in the corner booth, Mrs. Hargrove, muttered about vagrants to her husband, who grunted in agreement. The jukebox flipped to Merle Haggard's Okie from Muskogee, and the diner hummed with small-town comfort, oblivious to the reckoning approaching. But not everyone was blind. At a booth near the window, a man in his 30s sat alone, nursing a Coke. His name was Travis Boone, a former Army medic who'd done 2 tours in Iraq. He'd watched the scene with Sam unfold, his gut twisting as Cody pointed to the door. Travis had wanted to stand, to say something, but the weight of his own scars, PTSD, a divorce, a job at the auto shop that barely paid, kept him glued to his seat. He knew the look in Sam's eyes, the one that said, "I'm used to this." Travis had seen it in the mirror too many times. Now he stared at his drink, guilt gnawing at him. He didn't know Sam's name, but he knew the beret, the cane, the quiet pride. He should have spoken up. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, but the air stayed heavy. Sam reached the edge of downtown, where Main Street gave way to strip malls and gas stations. His leg ached, the old shrapnel wound throbbing in the cold. He thought of the diner, the way no one had met his eyes. It wasn't the first time. Last month, a clerk at the Quick Mart had accused him of stealing a candy bar he'd paid for. A year ago, a church deacon had suggested he move along from a community picnic. Franklin was home, but it didn't feel like it. Still, Sam kept walking, his cane a metronome of survival. Back at the diner, the bell above the door stayed silent, but the atmosphere was about to change. Ethan's truck pulled into the lot, followed by the others. The vehicles parked in a neat row, their engines cutting off in unison. 6 men stepped out, their boots splashing in puddles. Ethan led, his black jacket zipped to the chin, the trident tattoo peeking from his sleeve. Marcus was at his right, his massive frame unmistakable. Javier, Luke, Nate, and Ryan fanned out behind, their movements fluid, deliberate, like a team clearing a room. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their eyes scanned the diner through the rain-streaked windows, locking onto Cody, who was laughing with a waitress. Ethan paused at the edge of the lot, his breath visible in the chilly air. He remembered Sam's face in Kandahar, bloodied but unbroken, and then tonight, defeated by a kid who wouldn't know a hero if he tripped over one. "For Sam," Ethan said, his voice low, almost a vow. The others nodded, their faces hard but resolute. They weren't here to start a fight. They were here to right a wrong, to remind a town what honor looked like. Inside, Cody flipped a rag over his shoulder, unaware that the storm wasn't just outside. Kaylee's phone buzzed with notifications, her video now at 200 views. Mrs. Hargrove ordered peach cobbler. Travis Boone drained his Coke, his fingers tight around the glass, still wrestling with his silence. The jukebox played on, but the music couldn't drown out what was coming. The Seals moved toward the door, their boots heavy on the asphalt, their shadows long in the neon glow. When that bell jingled, it wouldn't just be a sound. It would be a signal that Sam Wheeler's story was far from over. Sam, now a block past the gas station, felt a strange prickle on his neck, like he was being watched. He glanced back, seeing only rain and empty streets. He didn't know that half a mile away, 6 men were about to walk into Millie's diner, carrying his name like a flag. He didn't know that Ethan Caldwell had never forgotten him, or that a debt from a desert ravine was about to be repaid. All he knew was the rain, the cane, and the shelter ahead. But for the first time in years, something shifted in the air. A whisper of hope, faint but real, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as invisible as he thought. The bell above Millie's diner door jingled sharply, cutting through the hum of conversation and the twang of Merle Haggard on the jukebox. 6 men stepped inside, their boots heavy on the linoleum, water dripping from their jackets onto the checkered floor. The air shifted, like the moment before a Tennessee thunderstorm breaks. Ethan Caldwell led the way, his trident tattoo visible as he unzipped his jacket. Behind him, Marcus Reed's massive frame filled the doorway, his scarred cheek catching the neon glow. Javier Torres, Luke Hayes, Nate Collins, and Ryan Decker followed, their movements synchronized, their eyes scanning the room with the precision of a team entering a hot zone. They weren't in fatigues, but their presence screamed military. Broad shoulders, clipped hair, and a quiet intensity that made the diner's warmth feel fragile. Cody, the waiter, froze mid-sentence, a coffee pot dangling in his hand. The teenage girl, Kaylee, lowered her phone, her TikTok video forgotten. The cops at the bar turned, hands resting on their belts. Mrs. Hargrove, the woman in the corner booth, stopped stirring her tea, her spoon clinking against the cup. The jukebox kept playing, but the laughter died. Every eye in Millie's locked onto the 6 men, who stood just inside the door, silent as gravestones. Ethan's gaze swept the room, not angry, not loud, but heavy, like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "Where's the man you just threw out?" Ethan asked, his voice low, steady, cutting through the silence. He didn't need to raise it. The words landed like a gavel. Cody blinked, his smirk gone, the coffee pot trembling slightly. He was dripping wet, sir. We got rules. He left. The sir slipped out, instinctive, as if Cody's body knew something his brain hadn't caught up to. Ethan stepped forward, his boots deliberate. His name is Samuel Wheeler, Captain, Special Forces, Vietnam. He saved my life in Kandahar. And you pushed him into the rain like he was garbage. Each word was measured, but the weight of them pressed against the room. Cody's face paled, his mouth opening, then closing. The cops exchanged glances, one reaching for his radio but hesitating. Kaylee's friend, Mia, whispered, "Oh my God." Her milkshake forgotten. Travis Boone, the army medic in the window booth, gripped his glass tighter, his guilt now a knot in his throat. Marcus stepped up beside Ethan, his voice a deep rumble. "You didn't ask his name. You didn't ask what he's done. You saw a wet coat and figured that's all he was." He didn't gesture, didn't point, but his presence was a wall. Javier, the shortest of the group but wiry and coiled, pulled out his phone. "Got it all on video," he said, holding it up. "The way you talked to him, the way you laughed. It's already uploaded." His accent, faint from his Texas roots, carried a quiet threat. Not violence, but truth. Cody stammered, I didn't know he was." He trailed off, realizing no excuse would hold. The older cop, Sergeant Daniels, cleared his throat, standing. "Look, fellas, let's keep this civil. The kid made a mistake. No need to escalate." But Ethan didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Cody. "A mistake," he said. "You humiliated a man who carried his team through hell. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Outside, Sam Wheeler leaned against a streetlight, the rain now a light mist. His cane dug into the gravel shoulder, his jacket heavy with water. He'd made it past the gas station, but his leg burned, the shrapnel scars screaming in the damp cold. He thought about the shelter, its fluorescent lights and sagging cots, but his mind kept drifting back to the diner. Not to Cody's words, those were nothing new, but to the silence of the others. The cops who didn't look up, the families who pretended he wasn't there, the girl with the phone, turning his shame into a game. He'd faced Viet Cong ambushes, but this felt like a betrayal, not by enemies, but by his own people. Sam pulled the green beret from his pocket again, holding it like a talisman. He remembered 1970, his second tour, when he trained Montagnard villagers to fight, living in their huts, sharing their rice. They'd called him Brother Sam, not because of his rank, but because he listened. When he came home, the country didn't. San Francisco, 1971. Protesters spat on his uniform at the airport. He'd burned his medals in a backyard fire, keeping only the beret. It was his anchor, proof he'd been someone once. Now it felt like a lie. He started walking again. Slower now, the shelter still a half-mile off. The street was quiet, save for the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Sam didn't hear the trucks idling a block away, didn't see the 6 men who just turned Millie's diner upside down. He didn't know that Ethan Caldwell, the kid he'd pulled from a burning Humvee, was standing in that diner, speaking his name like it was sacred. Back inside, the seals hadn't moved, but the room felt smaller, their presence filling every corner. Luke, the youngest at 32, stepped forward, his blue eyes calm but unyielding. Captain Wheeler ran 6 miles through a jungle with a dying man on his back. He took shrapnel to save me in Kandahar. And you? He pointed at Cody, then swept his hand toward the room. You let him walk away. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a sermon. Mrs. Hargrove looked down, her tea forgotten. Kaylee's phone slipped to the table, her face flushed with something like shame. Travis Boone stood, his chair scraping the floor. I should have said something, he said, his voice rough, like he was pulling the words from deep inside. I saw the beret. I knew he was one of us. But I sat here. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the truth. He looked at Ethan, then the others. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Travis wasn't a SEAL, but he was a brother, and that was enough. Ethan turned to the room, his voice rising just enough to carry. Sam Wheeler's out there in the rain because this town forgot what he gave. But we didn't. He pulled a small object from his pocket. A Seal Challenge coin, its trident gleaming under the diner's lights. This is for him, and we're bringing him back. The coin wasn't just metal. It was a promise, a symbol of a debt unpaid. The Seals moved toward the door, their boots echoing, but Ethan paused, looking at Cody. You're gonna see what a hero looks like, and you're gonna remember it. The bell jingled as they left, the sound sharp in the stunned silence. Cody sank against the counter, his bravado gone. Kaylee deleted her TikTok post, her fingers trembling. Sergeant Daniels radioed the station, not for backup, but to check on a shelter address. Mrs. Hargrove whispered to her husband, "We were wrong." Travis Boone pulled out his wallet, leaving a 20 on the table, and headed for the door, his limp barely noticeable. He didn't know where Sam was, but he wasn't staying silent anymore. Outside, the Seals climbed into their trucks, Ethan in the lead. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with mist. Ethan's radio crackled. "Got a visual," Javier said. "He's on Main, near the Shell station, heading north." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We're not losing him again." The trucks roared to life, their headlights slicing through the fog. They weren't just chasing a man. They were chasing a legacy, a chance to right a wrong that had festered too long. Sam, unaware, kept walking, his cane steady, his beret back in his pocket. The shelter was closer now, its dim lights visible through the trees. He thought of his old team, their faces fading with time. One more step, he told himself, the words a mantra. But behind him, the growl of engines grew louder, and a light bright, unyielding, swept across the road. Sam turned, squinting, as the first truck slowed. A man stepped out, his silhouette tall against the headlights. "Captain Wheeler?" the man called, his voice firm but warm. Sam froze, his cane trembling in his hand. For the first time in years, someone had spoken his name. The headlights of Ethan Caldwell's Ford F-150 cut through the mist on Franklin's Main Street, pinning Sam Wheeler in their glow. Sam stood frozen, his cane planted on the wet gravel, his soaked army jacket glistening under the beams. The shelter's lights flickered in the distance, but for the first time in years, Sam didn't move toward them. The voice that called his name, Captain Wheeler, carried a weight he hadn't heard since the jungles of Vietnam, since the deserts of Kandahar. It wasn't just a question. It was a summons, a recognition, a lifeline. Ethan stepped forward, his boots crunching on the roadside. The other 5 Seals, Marcus Reed, Javier Torres, Luke Hayes, Nate Collins, and Ryan Decker, fanned out from their trucks, their silhouettes sharp against the headlights. They didn't rush, didn't crowd, but their presence filled the empty street like a battalion. Ethan's face, weathered by years of war, softened as he closed the distance. "It's you, sir," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'd know that beret anywhere." He gestured to Sam's pocket, where the faded Special Forces patch peeked out, damp but defiant. Sam's eyes narrowed, confusion mixing with caution. "Do I know you, son?" he asked, his gravelly voice steady despite the tremble in his cane. He'd learned long ago not to trust kindness. It came with strings, or worse, pity. But Ethan's gray eyes held something different. Not charity, but respect, the kind forged in fire. "Ethan Caldwell, sir. SEAL Team 6, Kandahar, 2013, Ethan said, standing straighter. "You pulled me out of a burning Humvee. Took shrapnel in your leg doing it. You said, 'You're going home, kid.' I never got to thank you." His words hung in the air, heavy with a decade's worth of gratitude. Sam's breath caught, his mind flashing to that ravine, the crack of AKs, the heat of flames. He remembered the kid, bloodied, half-conscious, too young to die. But he hadn't connected that face to this man, broad-shouldered and battle-hardened, standing before him now. Marcus stepped up, his massive frame dwarfing Sam's frail one. "Marcus Reed, sir. I was there too." You carried Caldwell 300 yards under fire. Saved us all. His voice, usually a growl, was soft, reverent. One by one, the others introduced themselves: Javier, Luke, Nate, Ryan, each with a nod, each with a story of how Sam's legend had reached them. Luke, the youngest, said, "My CO told me about you in training. Said you were the kind of soldier we should all be." Sam's cane shook, not from the cold but from the weight of their words. He looked down, his throat tight. "That was a long time ago," he muttered. "I ain't that man no more." His voice cracked, betraying the years of rejection, the protests, the pond medals, the nights in shelters where no one asked his name. Ethan shook his head. "You're wrong, sir. You're still him, and we're not letting you walk away again." He reached into his jacket, pulling out the SEAL Challenge coin he'd shown in the diner. The trident gleamed, its edges worn but sharp. "This is yours. It's not given lightly. It's earned. You earned it in 69, in 13, and every day you kept going." He held it out, not as a gift, but as a debt repaid. Sam stared at the coin, his eyes glistening. He hadn't held anything of value since he pawned his silver star. "I don't deserve that," he said, his voice barely a whisper. But Ethan stepped closer, pressing the coin into Sam's calloused palm, closing his fingers around it. "You do," Ethan said, "and we're here to prove it." Without a word, Ethan snapped to attention, his right hand rising in a crisp salute. The others followed in perfect unison, their boots snapping together, their hands steady despite the mist. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was the kind reserved for fallen heroes, for generals, for men like Sam who'd walked through hell and carried others out. The street was silent, save for the drip of water from the trees, the hum of idling engines. Sam's breath hitched, his eyes wide. Muscle memory kicked in, and his right hand lifted, trembling but precise, returning the salute. For a moment, he wasn't a drifter in a soaked jacket. He was Captain Wheeler, Green Beret, unbroken. Back at Millie's diner, the silence lingered like a held breath. Cody sat on a stool, his head in his hands, the coffee pot forgotten. Kaylee and Mia stared at their phones, the deleted TikTok video a ghost between them. Sergeant Daniels, the older cop, leaned against the bar, his radio silent. "That kid didn't know," he said to his partner, but it sounded hollow. Mrs. Hargrove clutched her purse, her husband's hand on hers, both avoiding the eyes of the waitress who'd cleared their plates. Travis Boone was gone, his 20 still on the table, his footsteps fading into the night as he headed north, driven by a need to make amends. The diner's manager, a wiry man named Dale, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on an apron. "What happened here?" he asked, sensing the tension. Sergeant Daniels filled him in, his voice low. Dale's face tightened. "I'll talk to Cody," he said. "But that man, we should have done better." He glanced at the door, as if expecting Sam to walk back in. The jukebox clicked, switching to Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues. But no one sang along. The diner felt smaller, its warmth dimmed by the truth Ethan's words had laid bare. Outside, on Main Street, the SEALs lowered their salutes, but they didn't step back. Ethan gestured to the F-150. "Sir, you're not going to that shelter tonight," he said. "You're coming with us." Sam blinked, his hand still clutching the coin. "I ain't got nowhere else," he said, his voice rough. Marcus smiled, a rare crack in his stoic face. "You do now. We got a spare room at my place. It's yours as long as you need it." Sam shook his head, pride warring with exhaustion. "I don't take handouts," he said. Javier laughed softly. "This ain't a handout, Captain. It's what brothers do." The word brothers hit Sam like a punch, echoing the Montagnards who'd called him the same. He looked at the 6 men, their faces a mix of youth and scars, and saw something he'd lost. A unit, a family, a reason to stand tall. He nodded, just once, and let Ethan guide him to the truck. The others formed a loose circle around him, shielding him from the mist, their jackets brushing his shoulders. Sam climbed into the passenger seat, the coin still in his hand, its weight grounding him. Ethan slid behind the wheel, glancing at him. "You're home, sir," he said, and started the engine. The other trucks fell in behind, their headlights a convoy through the fog. As they drove past Millie's, a figure stood on the sidewalk, Travis Boone, his own jacket wet, his eyes locked on the trucks. He raised a hand, not a salute, but a gesture of respect. Sam didn't see it, but Ethan did, and he nodded back. The diner's neon sign flickered, its glow fading as the convoy moved north, toward a small ranch house on the edge of Franklin where a bed, a hot meal, and a new chapter waited. Inside the diner, Kaylee whispered to Mia, "I messed up." Mia nodded, her milkshake untouched. "We all did." They didn't know Sam's name, but they'd heard it now, spoken like a prayer by men who knew what it meant. Cody looked up, his eyes red. "I didn't know," he said, but the words felt empty. Dale, the manager, put a hand on his shoulder. "You'll learn, kid. We all will." The bell above the door stayed silent, but the echo of the SEAL's boots lingered, a reminder that heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they wear soaked jackets and carry canes. Sam, in the truck, looked out at the passing lights, the coin warm in his palm. For the first time in decades he felt seen, not as a drifter, but as a soldier, a brother, a man who mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, but the men beside him were not. And as the convoy rolled on, Franklin began to wake up to the legend it had almost lost. The gravel crunched under the tires of Ethan Caldwell's Ford F-150 as it pulled into the driveway of a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Franklin, Tennessee. The mist had lifted, leaving a sky speckled with stars, their light faint against the glow of a single porch lamp. Sam Wheeler sat in the passenger seat, the SEAL Challenge coin still clutched in his hand, its trident warm from his grip. He stared at the house, white siding, a small lawn with a flagpole, an American flag snapping gently in the breeze. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, a far cry from the sagging cots and fluorescent hum of the shelter he'd called home. Ethan cut the engine, the silence settling like dust. The other trucks, carrying Marcus Reed, Javier Torres, Luke Hayes, Nate Collins, and Ryan Decker, parked along the curb, their headlights winking out in unison. Sam's cane rested between his knees, his soaked army jacket clinging to his frame. "This ain't necessary," he said, his voice low, rough with pride. "I can manage at the shelter." Ethan turned, his gray eyes steady. "With respect, sir, you're not managing anymore. You're living. This is Marcus's place. He's got a room ready." Marcus, already out of his Ram, opened Sam's door, his massive frame softened by a rare grin. "Come on, Captain. Got a hot shower and some dry clothes waiting. Ain't much, but it's yours." Sam hesitated, his fingers tightening around the coin. Handout stung worse than rain, but the word captain, spoken not with pity, but honor, eased the knot in his chest. He nodded, slow and deliberate, and let Ethan help him down, his cane tapping the gravel. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and coffee, with a faint tang of gun oil from Marcus's workbench in the garage. The living room was sparse but warm. A leather couch, a flat screen tuned to a muted Titans game, a shelf of military history books, and a framed photo of Marcus's SEAL team in Fallujah. Marcus led Sam down a short hall to a small bedroom. Twin bed, clean sheets, a dresser with a folded stack of clothes. Jeans, a flannel shirt, socks. A towel hung on the door. "Bathrooms across the hall," Marcus said. "Take your time. We'll heat up some chili." Sam stood in the doorway, the coin heavy in his palm. He hadn't had a room of his own since Memphis years ago, before the jobs dried up and the world moved on. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus leaned against the frame, his scar catching the light. "Because you did it for us, sir. In Nam, in Kandahar. You carried the load. Now it's our turn." He clapped Sam's shoulder, gentle but firm, and left him to settle in. Back at Millie's diner, the air was thick with unease. The jukebox had gone quiet, its last song, Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues, fading into memory. Cody, the waiter, sat at the counter, his head bowed, the coffee pot cold beside him. Kaylee and Mia, the teenagers, huddled in their booth, their phones face down. "I shouldn't have posted it," Kaylee whispered, her voice small. Mia nodded, her milkshake a puddle of pink. "He wasn't just some guy. He was somebody." The word hung between them, heavy with regret. Sergeant Daniels, the older cop, sipped his coffee, his radio crackling with routine calls. "Kid's young," he said to his partner, nodding at Cody. "He'll learn. But that man, we all let him down." His partner, a younger officer named Ruiz, frowned. "I saw the beret. Should have known better." They fell silent, the weight of their inaction settling in. Dale, the manager, stood behind the counter, scribbling on a notepad. "I'm comping his coffee if he comes back," he said, more to himself than anyone. "And Cody's off the floor for a week. He needs to think." Travis Boone, the army medic, hadn't made it far. He stood under a street lamp a block from the diner, his jacket damp, his eyes scanning the road where the SEALs trucks had vanished. He'd followed them out, driven by guilt, but lost them in the mist. His phone buzzed, a text from his boss at the auto shop, asking about a late shift, but he ignored it. He thought of Sam's face, the quiet dignity in his eyes, and his own silence in the diner. "Never again," he muttered, pulling his collar up and heading toward the shelter, hoping to find Sam, to say what he should have said. In Franklin, word of the incident was already spreading. Kaylee's deleted TikTok video had been screenshotted by a friend, shared in a local Facebook group with the caption, "This happened at Millie's. We need to do better." Comments poured in, some defensive, others ashamed, a few calling for a boycott. By midnight, the post had 300 shares, the story of the veteran in the rain, taking root. A retired teacher, Mrs. Clara Thompson, read it in her kitchen, her husband a Vietnam vet himself. "That could have been Jim," she told her book club the next morning, her voice breaking. The group decided to organize a food drive for the shelter, a small step toward amends. At Marcus's house, Sam emerged from the bathroom, steam trailing behind him. The flannel shirt hung loose on his thin frame, but it was dry, warm, clean. He gripped his cane, the coin now tucked in his pocket beside the beret. In the kitchen, the SEALs sat around an oak table, bowls of chili steaming, cornbread cooling on a rack. Javier strummed a guitar softly, humming a Willie Nelson tune. Luke passed Sam a bowl, his blue eyes bright. "Eat up, sir. Marcus makes a mean chili, but don't ask for the recipe. He's stubborn." Sam sat, the chair creaking under him. The chili's heat warmed his hands, its spice a faint echo of Montagnard meals in Vietnam. He ate slowly, listening as the SEALs talked. Stories of deployments, bad COs, and bar fights that ended in laughs. They didn't press him to speak, but their glances invited him in, like he'd always had a seat at their table. "You ever miss it?" Nate asked, his voice casual but curious. Sam paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "The men, yeah," he said. "The mission, sometimes. The rest, no." The SEALs nodded, understanding the unspoken. The weight of war, the cost of coming home. Ethan leaned back, his coffee mug dwarfed in his hands. "We're starting a business," he said. "Private security, training gigs. Could use someone with your experience, sir. No pressure. Just think about it." Sam's eyes flicked up, surprised. He hadn't worked in years. Not since the warehouses let him go for being too slow. "I'm old," he said, half a challenge. Javier laughed. "Age don't mean squat when you've got stories like yours, Captain." Sam didn't answer, but the coin in his pocket felt heavier, a reminder he wasn't done yet. Outside, the flagpole clinked in the breeze, the stars clearer now. Sam glanced through the window, seeing the flag's stripes against the night. He thought of his team in '69, the ones who didn't make it, and the kid in Kandahar who did. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel alone. The SEALs' laughter filled the kitchen, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed. He took another bite of chili, the warmth spreading through him, and let himself believe, just for tonight, that he was home. In Franklin, the diner's neon sign buzzed, its glow dimmer as the town slept. But the story of Sam Wheeler wasn't sleeping. It was spreading, carried by whispers, posts, and regrets, planting seeds of change in a community that had looked away too long. And somewhere on Main Street, Travis Boone kept walking, his boots steady, searching for a man he'd never forget. The morning sun broke over Franklin, Tennessee, casting long shadows across Main Street's brick storefronts and the still damp pavement from last night's rain. At Millie's Diner, the neon sign flickered off as the breakfast crowd trickled in. Truckers grabbing coffee, retirees lingering over eggs, and a few high school kids cutting class for pancakes. The jukebox hummed with Hank Williams, but the air carried a different weight today, heavier than the usual small-town chatter. By 7 a.m., the story of Sam Wheeler, the veteran pushed out into the rain, had spread like wildfire, fueled by Facebook posts, church group texts, and whispers over biscuits and gravy. In Marcus Reed's ranch house, Sam Wheeler sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hands. The flannel shirt Marcus had given him was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing arms still wiry despite his age. His cane leaned against the chair, the Seal Challenge coin and green beret tucked safely in the bedroom dresser. Ethan Caldwell stood at the stove, flipping bacon, while Javier Torres and Luke Hayes sprawled on the couch, arguing over last night's Titans game. The other Seals, Marcus, Nate Collins, and Ryan Decker, had left at dawn for a training job, but the house still felt full, alive with the easy banter of men who'd faced death together. "You sleep okay, sir?" Ethan asked, sliding a plate of bacon and eggs in front of Sam. Sam nodded, his gravelly voice softer than usual. "Better than I have in years." The bed had been firm, the room quiet, a stark contrast to the shelter's creaking cots and restless coughs. He'd woken once, startled by the silence, expecting to hear sirens or snores. Instead, he'd heard the faint clink of the flagpole outside, a sound that grounded him, like a heartbeat. Javier, strumming a guitar on the couch, grinned. "You're stuck with us now, Captain. Ethan's cooking ain't great, but it's better than MRE's." Sam's lips twitched, a rare hint of a smile. He thought of Vietnam, sharing C-rations with his team under ponchos, and Kandahar, where he choked down freeze-dried chili with Ethan's squad. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was brotherhood. He took a bite of eggs, the warmth spreading, and let himself settle into the moment. At Millie's, Cody stood behind the counter, his apron untied, his eyes red from a sleepless night. Dale, the manager, had pulled him off serving duty, assigning him to dishwashing until he got his head straight. Cody's hands shook as he scrubbed a skillet, replaying Ethan's words. "You humiliated a man who carried his team through hell." He'd seen the SEALs' faces, their quiet fury, and Sam's beret, faded but proud. He'd overheard customers this morning, talking about the veteran with hushed respect. Cody, barely 19, felt smaller than ever, his smirk a memory he wished he could erase. Kaylee, the teenager who'd filmed Sam, sat in a booth with Mia, picking at a waffle. Her phone was off, a first in months. The screenshot of her deleted TikTok post had gone viral locally, with comments calling her out by name. "I didn't know," she told Mia, her voice cracking. "I thought it was funny." Mia, usually quick with a laugh, looked serious. "We gotta fix it, Kay. That man, he's a hero." They brainstormed quietly, sketching ideas on a napkin. An apology, maybe a fundraiser for the shelter. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Travis Boone, the army medic, hadn't slept either. He'd walked to the shelter last night, only to find Sam gone. This morning, he sat in his pickup outside Millie's, engine off, staring at the diner's sign. His hands gripped the wheel, scarred from Iraq, where he'd patched up soldiers under fire. He'd seen Sam's kind before, quiet, proud, broken by a world that didn't care. His silence in the diner gnawed at him, a failure he couldn't shake. He pulled out his phone, texting his old platoon sergeant. "Need advice. Missed a chance to stand up for a vet." Then he got out, heading inside, determined to find Sam's story, if not the man himself. Franklin was waking up to its mistake. Mrs. Clara Thompson's book club had grown their food drive into a community event, set for next Saturday at the Baptist church. The Franklin Herald, a local paper, picked up the story, running a headline, "Veteran turned away at local diner, honored by Navy SEALs." The article, shared 500 times by noon, quoted an anonymous witness, likely Sergeant Daniels, describing the SEALs' salute. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Hashtag honor Sam Wheeler, hashtag respect our vets. A few trolls called it woke nonsense, but they were drowned out by stories of other veterans, their sacrifices laid bare in comment threads. At the ranch house, Ethan sat across from Sam, his coffee cooling. "We've got a meeting tomorrow," he said. "Our security firm's pitching to a client, corporate protection gig. You'd be good with the training side, sir. You taught Montagnards to fight. You could teach these guys to think." Sam's eyes flicked up, wary. "I'm 68, son. My teaching days are done." Luke, overhearing, laughed from the couch. "With respect, Captain, you're tougher than half the rookies we train. Age ain't the issue." Sam rubbed his thumb over the table, thinking. He'd trained villagers in 70, turning farmers into fighters, and advised SEALs in Kandahar, sharing jungle tactics over stale coffee. He'd loved the work, the purpose, but the world had told him he was too old, too broken. The coin in his pocket said otherwise. "I'll think on it," he said, his voice gruff but open. Ethan nodded, a spark of hope in his eyes. "That's all we ask, sir." Outside, the flagpole clinked, the American flag catching the morning breeze. Sam glanced at it, remembering the day he'd enlisted, 18 and full of fire, promising to serve a country that hadn't always served him back. The SEAL's offer wasn't just a job. It was a chance to matter again. He sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him, and let the idea take root. In town, the ripples grew. Sergeant Daniels stopped by the shelter, asking about Sam, leaving his card with the director. "If he needs anything, call me," he said, his voice heavy. Mrs. Hargrove, the diner regular, donated a box of canned goods to the church drive, her husband writing a check for $200. "We didn't know," she told the pastor, her eyes wet. The high school football coach, hearing the story, planned a veterans tribute at Friday's game, inviting local VFW members to stand on the field. Cody, still scrubbing dishes, overheard Dale on the phone, offering free meals to veterans for a month. "It's a start," Dale said, hanging up. Cody paused, soap dripping from his hands. He thought of his granddad, a Korean war vet, and the stories he'd ignored as a kid. He grabbed a notepad, jotting down an idea. A public apology, maybe in the Herald. Scared him, but it felt right. Travis Boone walked into Millie's, his boots scuffing the linoleum. He nodded at Dale, who poured him a coffee. "Heard about the SEALs," Travis said. "That vet, Sam Wheeler, he's okay?" Dale shrugged. "They took him somewhere. Not sure where." Travis's jaw tightened. He'd find Sam, not to ease his guilt, but to honor a brother. He left a 10 on the counter and headed to the VFW post, hoping for leads. At the ranch house, Javier strummed "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain," the notes soft against the morning light. Sam listened, his coffee gone, his cane still. He thought of his team, the Montagnards, the SEALs in Kandahar. He thought of the coin, the salute, the room down the hall. For the first time in years, he felt the stir of purpose, faint but real. Franklin was changing, and so was he, pulled from the shadows by men who refused to let him fade. The autumn sun hung low over Franklin, Tennessee, painting the town square in shades of gold and amber. It was Veterans Day, 6 weeks after the rainy night that changed everything at Millie's Diner. Main Street buzzed with life, families in Titans jerseys, kids waving small American flags, and veterans in VFW caps gathering for the annual parade. A high school band tuned their instruments near the courthouse, while food trucks dished out barbecue and sweet tea. At the edge of the square, a new addition stood. A polished granite plaque embedded in the sidewalk, inscribed with the words, "In honor of Captain Samuel Wheeler, USA Special Forces, and all who serve." It wasn't flashy, but it was permanent, a quiet testament to a man who'd walked through fire and rain. Sam Wheeler stood beside the plaque, his cane steady, his green beret perched proudly on his head. The flannel shirt was gone, replaced by a pressed khaki jacket, a gift from the SEALs. The challenge coin rested in his pocket, its trident a constant reminder of the night he was seen. At 68, Sam looked taller now, his shoulders squared, his eyes clear. Ethan Caldwell stood to his left, Marcus Reed to his right, with Javier Torres, Luke Hayes, Nate Collins, and Ryan Decker forming a loose semicircle behind. They weren't in uniform, but their presence carried the weight of one, their trident tattoos catching the light as they nodded to passing veterans. The parade hadn't started, but the crowd was already gathering around Sam. A young boy, maybe 10, tugged his dad's sleeve, pointing at the beret. "Is that the guy from the diner?" he whispered. His father, a Gulf War vet, nodded, leading the boy over. "Captain Wheeler," the man said, extending a hand. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Sam shook his hand, his grip firm despite the years. "Just did my job, son," he said, but his voice held a warmth that hadn't been there before. Back at Millie's diner, the breakfast rush was over, but the place was packed. A new sign hung above the counter. Veterans eat free every Monday. Cody, reinstated as a waiter, moved between tables, his smile quieter now, earned through weeks of reflection. He'd published an apology in the Franklin Herald, a half-page letter admitting his mistake and pledging to volunteer at the local VFW. Customers still ribbed him, but it was good-natured, a sign he'd been forgiven, if not forgotten. "Coffee, Travis?" he asked, stopping at a booth where Travis Boone sat, his Army medic patch sewn onto his jacket. Travis nodded, his eyes on the window, where the parade was forming. He'd found Sam a month ago, through the VFW, and apologized face-to-face at Marcus's house. "I should have stood up," he'd said, his voice breaking. Sam had clapped his shoulder, saying, "You're standing now." Since then, Travis had joined the SEAL security firm as a part-time trainer, sharing his medic skills. He'd also started a support group for local vets, meeting weekly at the community center. "I'll be at the parade," he told Cody, leaving a tip and heading out, his limp barely noticeable. Kaylee and Mia, the teenagers, stood near the plaque, handing out flyers for their fundraiser. A 5K run to benefit the shelter. They'd raised $3,000 so far, enough for new mattresses and a heating upgrade. Kaylee's cheeks flushed as she saw Sam, remembering her TikTok post. She'd apologized in person, her voice trembling, and Sam had hugged her, saying, "You're learning, kid. That's enough." Now, she wore a #HonorSamWheeler t-shirt, her phone in her pocket, unused. Mia, beside her, waved at a group of classmates who joined the cause, their laughter a far cry from the diner's cruel giggles. The Franklin Herald had run a follow-up story, From Rain to Respect. A town honors its hero, detailing Sam's journey from Vietnam to Kandahar to Franklin streets. It went viral, picked up by national outlets, with CNN calling it a lesson in redemption. Social media amplified it, with #RespectOurVets trending for days. The shelter saw donations pour in: blankets, clothes, even a van from a local dealership. Mrs. Clara Thompson's food drive had grown into a monthly event, with churches and schools competing to collect the most. "It's not about one man," she told the Herald, "but Sam showed us what we'd forgotten." At Marcus's house, Sam had settled in, his room now his own. A shelf held his beret, the coin, and a photo of his Vietnam team, sent by a surviving squadmate. He'd joined the SEAL security firm, not as a field operator, but as a trainer, teaching situational awareness and leadership to corporate clients. His first session, a week ago, had ended with a standing ovation from executives who'd never held a rifle but hung on his every word. "You make it real, sir," Ethan had said, pride in his voice. Sam didn't talk about it much, but the coin in his pocket felt lighter now, a badge of purpose, not just memory. The parade began with a drum roll, the high school band marching past, horns blaring Sweet Caroline. Veterans followed, some in wheelchairs, others with canes, their unit patches gleaming. Sam wasn't marching. He declined, saying, "I've done enough walking." Instead, he stood by the plaque, shaking hands, listening to stories. A woman, her father a POW, pressed a folded flag into his hands, tears in her eyes. "For you," she said. Sam nodded, his throat tight, and tucked it under his arm, a weight he was proud to carry. Sergeant Daniels, in dress blues, paused to salute Sam, his radio silent for once. "You're welcome at the station any time, Captain," he said. Mrs. Hargrove, nearby, handed Sam a homemade apple pie, her husband nodding awkwardly. "We're sorry," she said. Sam smiled, a rare full one. "Pie's a good start, ma'am." The crowd chuckled, the tension easing, a community knitting itself back together. The SEALs stayed close, their laughter mingling with the band's music. Javier strummed an air guitar, earning a grin from Luke. Marcus, usually stoic, clapped Sam's shoulder, saying, "You're stuck with us, old man." Sam snorted, the first laugh anyone had heard from him. Ethan watched, his gray eyes soft. He'd started this to repay a debt, but it had grown into something bigger. A movement, a reminder that heroes walk among us, often unseen. As the parade ended, the crowd gathered around the plaque, phones out, not to mock, but to honor. A local sculptor had donated a small bronze beret, mounted beside the granite, its dagger catching the sun. Kids touched it, veterans saluted it, and Franklin's mayor announced a new veteran scholarship in Sam's name. Sam stood quietly, the flag under his arm, the coin in his pocket, the beret on his head. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence was enough. That night at Marcus's house, the SEALs grilled burgers, Willie Nelson on the stereo, the flagpole clinking outside. Sam sat on the porch, a beer in hand, watching the stars. Travis joined him, offering a toast. "To brothers," he said. Sam clinked his bottle, his voice steady. "To brothers." Inside, the laughter rose, a sound of home. Franklin had changed, not with fanfare, but with quiet acts. Free meals, fundraisers, a plaque, a promise. Sam Wheeler, once a shadow in the rain, was a legend now, not because he asked, but because a town chose to see him. And as the stars burned above, his story spread, a call to honor the heroes who walk, limp, or stand among us. Their scars proof of a courage that never fades.